Sometimes a book closes, and the real story begins. LeVar Burton's hands trembled as he set down the worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. The studio lights felt too bright. 20 children sat cross-legged on the rainbow carpet, their eyes fixed on something they'd never seen before, their hero, unable to speak. In the front row, an elderly woman clutched a yellowed envelope, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. What happened next would become the most powerful moment in Reading Rainbow's 26-year history. ****. The cameras kept rolling, but everything had stopped. The children, usually buzzing with energy, sat in absolute silence. The crew members lowered their equipment. Even the studio audience, parents who had brought their kids to watch a taping, felt something sacred unfolding before them. LeVar Burton looked at the woman, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, 73 years old, and did something he had never done in 3 decades of television. He broke protocol. But to understand why this moment shattered everyone in that room, we need to go back to how it started. ****. It was supposed to be a regular episode. March 1998, PBS Studios in New York. The theme was Stories That Last Forever, featuring classic children's books about love, loss, and what it means to be real. LeVar had prepared his usual warm introduction, ready to guide children through the magic of The Velveteen Rabbit. The studio audience arrived early that day. Among them was Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, brought by her granddaughter Sarah, age 8. Sarah loved Reading Rainbow, watched it every afternoon after school. But Eleanor hadn't wanted to come. "I don't do television," she had told Sarah weeks earlier when the tickets arrived. "And I don't do children's shows." But Sarah had begged. "Please, Grandma. LeVar Burton is my hero. Just this once?" Eleanor had finally agreed, though she wore black, as she had every day for the past 4 years since her husband Robert passed away. She clutched her purse tightly, inside it a letter she carried everywhere. A letter she had never shared with anyone. No one knew that within an hour, that letter would ***** everything. The taping began normally. LeVar's voice filled the studio with its characteristic warmth. "Hello, friends. Today we're going to read a very special story about a toy rabbit who wants to become real. But first I want to talk about what makes something, or someone, truly real." He opened The Velveteen Rabbit and began reading. The children leaned forward captivated. Sarah's eyes sparkled. But Eleanor sat rigid in her seat, her knuckles white around her purse. LeVar read, "Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." Something shifted in the room. Eleanor's breath caught. LeVar continued. "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." Eleanor's hand moved to the letter in her purse. Her lips trembled. Sarah noticed her grandmother's distress and whispered, "Grandma, are you okay?" But Eleanor wasn't listening. She was somewhere else entirely, in a hospital room 4 years ago, holding Robert's hand as he took his final breaths. His last words echoing in her mind, "Read it when you're ready. Read it when you need to remember." LeVar reached the passage. "Once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." That's when Eleanor stood up. The movement caught LeVar's attention. He paused mid-sentence, looking up from the book. Eleanor was standing in the audience, trembling, the letter now clutched in her hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, but I need to." The studio went silent. LeVar's producer signaled to keep rolling. Something was happening, something unrehearsed and raw. LeVar set down the book. He stood up, walked past the cameras, past the planned blocking, and approached Eleanor. "Ma'am," he said gently, "would you like to share something?" Eleanor looked at him, then at Sarah, then at the letter in her hands. Tears streamed down her face. "My husband," she began, her voice breaking. "Robert. He died 4 years ago." Cancer. Before he died, he wrote me a letter. He told me to read it when I was ready. I carried it every day, but I couldn't. I couldn't open it. The children in the studio had gone completely still. Some were crying without knowing why. LeVar reached out and took Eleanor's hand. Would you like to read it now? Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Sarah came to her grandmother's side, holding her other hand. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the envelope she had carried for 1,460 days. The paper was soft from being handled, folded and unfolded in moments of grief. She began to read, her voice shaking. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means you're finally ready to hear what I've been trying to tell you our whole life together. You made me real. Not the cancer, not the treatments, not even dying could take that away. The Velveteen Rabbit was always our story. Do you remember? I read it to you on our first anniversary. You cried then too. LeVar Burton, the man who had maintained composure through thousands of shows, felt tears running down his own face. Eleanor continued. You asked me once if becoming real hurt. I told you what the skin horse said, sometimes it does. Loving you hurts sometimes. Not because you caused pain, but because love makes you vulnerable. It makes you soft. It makes you breakable. But Eleanor, it was worth every moment. Being real with you was worth everything. The camera operators were crying. The sound technician wiped his eyes. The children sat transfixed, understanding something profound without having words for it. The rabbit became real because a child loved him. Eleanor read through sobs. I became real because you loved me. And here's what I need you to know, my love, you're still real. Our love is still real. When you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. I'm gone, but what we had, that lasts. That's always. Don't stop being real, Eleanor. Don't let grief make you a toy on a shelf again. Live. Love. Be real for both of us now. The letter ended. The studio was silent except for the sound of crying, adults and children alike. LeVar Burton did something extraordinary then. He asked the crew to stop filming for a moment. The cameras lowered. He guided Eleanor to the reading chair, sat beside her, and for 5 minutes, the studio became a sacred space of shared grief and healing. When the cameras resumed, LeVar didn't go back to the book. Instead, he turned to the children. Friends, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is what stories do. They don't just entertain us. They help us understand our lives. Mrs. Hayes' husband Robert knew that. He knew that the right story, at the right time, could help someone heal. He picked up The Velveteen Rabbit again, but he didn't read from it. He held it up. This book has been loved by millions of children. But today, it helped a real person, with a real loss, find real hope. That's the power of stories. They make us real. They keep us real. And they remind us that love, real love, lasts for always. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. ****. After the taping ended, something remarkable happened. The children, one by one, approached Eleanor. They didn't know what to say, so they just hugged her. 20 children, from ages 5 to 11, creating a circle of wordless comfort around a grieving widow. Sarah held her grandmother tight. I didn't know, Grandma. I didn't know about the letter. I know, sweetie, Eleanor whispered. I wasn't ready. Until today. LeVar Burton sat with Eleanor for another hour after everyone else had left. They talked about Robert, about loss, about the strange gift of grief that connects us all. He gave her something before she left, a first edition copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, signed with a message. For Eleanor and Robert. Real lasts for always. LeVar. The episode that aired 3 weeks later was unlike anything PBS had ever broadcast. Instead of editing out Eleanor's moment, they made it the centerpiece. The show opened with LeVar explaining what had happened, warning parents that it was emotional but important. The network received over 50,000 letters in response. Parents wrote about watching with their children, having conversations about loss they'd been afraid to start. Teachers used the episode in their classrooms to talk about grief and healing. Therapists showed it to families dealing with loss. But the most powerful letters came from children. One 9-year-old wrote, "Dear Mr. Burton, my dad died last year. I didn't want to talk about it. But after seeing the grandma read her letter, I told my mom how much I missed him. She cried and said she missed him too. Thank you for showing us it's okay to be sad." Eleanor Hayes' life changed after that day. She started volunteering at a children's hospital reading The Velveteen Rabbit to young patients. She told Robert's story, their story, to anyone who needed to hear that love survives death. Sarah never missed a reading. That day on Reading Rainbow, Eleanor said years later, "LeVar didn't just let me share a letter. He showed me that my grief wasn't something to hide. Robert's love wasn't something to keep locked away. Real things, real love, real loss, real healing, those are meant to be shared." For LeVar Burton, that March day in 1998 became a defining moment. In interviews afterward, he spoke about it often. "We think children's television is about entertainment and education," he said. "But that day taught me it's about something deeper. It's about truth. It's about showing children that life is beautiful and painful and real. That's what stories do. They don't protect us from reality, they help us face it." The episode won 3 Emmy Awards. But more importantly, it changed how children's programming approached difficult subjects. Networks became willing to address grief, loss, and complex emotions, trusting that children could handle truth when presented with love. The book Eleanor received that day, the signed first edition, became a family treasure. When Sarah grew up and had her own daughter, Eleanor read The Velveteen Rabbit to her great-granddaughter, with LeVar's inscription visible on the first page. She would tell the story of that day in the studio, how a children's show host became a healer, how a letter carried for 4 years finally found its moment. "My great-grandfather's love made my great-grandmother real," Sarah's daughter would say, not fully understanding but somehow knowing it was true. The letter itself, Robert's final words to Eleanor, was donated to the Library of Congress in 2015. It sits now in the American Memory Collection, preserved as an example of how personal stories intersect with cultural moments. Researchers studying the impact of children's media reference it. Students writing about grief literature cite it. But for Eleanor, it remains simply this: proof that love is real, that it lasts, that it transforms both the lover and the beloved into something that can never become unreal again. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. LeVar Burton continued reading Rainbow for another 8 years after that episode. He read thousands of books, inspired millions of children, won dozens of awards. But he never forgot the day a widow's letter taught him, and everyone watching, the deepest truth of all. Stories aren't just words on pages. They're mirrors for our souls, maps for our grief, bridges between our isolation and our connection. They don't just help us escape reality, they help us face it, embrace it, and find meaning in it. When Reading Rainbow ended its run in 2006, LeVar's final message to viewers included this: "Books make us real. Stories make us real. Love makes us real. And once you're real, you never stop being real. That lasts for always." 25 years after that March day, Eleanor Hayes passed away at age 98. She died peacefully, surrounded by family, with The Velveteen Rabbit on her bedside table and Robert's letter in her hands. Sarah was there, holding her grandmother, as she had been held all those years ago in a television studio. Eleanor's last words were simple: "Tell LeVar thank you. Tell him the story continues." And it does. In every classroom where a teacher reads The Velveteen Rabbit, and a child asks about loss. In every living room where a parent talks to their child about grief because they saw it's possible. In every heart that carries a letter, a memory, a love that won't die. The legacy of that moment lives on because LeVar Burton understood something profound. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop performing and start being present. Asterisk asterisk. He could have continued reading. He could have ignored Eleanor's distress. He could have prioritized the show over the moment. Instead, he chose to be real, to show children that authenticity matters more than perfection, that human connection matters more than production schedules, that love matters more than anything. That's what made him not just a television host, but a healer. Not just an educator, but a guide. Not just a reader of stories, but a living embodiment of what stories teach. That being real means being vulnerable, being present, being open to the pain and beauty of being alive. The book closed that day in 1998. But the real story, the story of how one widow's grief became millions of people's healing, that story never ends. Asterisk asterisk. It continues in every child who learns it's okay to cry. In every adult who finally opens the letter they've been carrying. In every person who realizes that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into memory, into legacy, into the eternal present tense of. Once you are real, you can't become unreal again. LeVar Burton gave us many gifts through reading Rainbow. But perhaps the greatest was this: he showed us that the most powerful stories aren't just in books. They're in us. And when we have the courage to share them, we make each other real. Years later, a young producer asked LeVar if he regretted stopping the show that day. Asterisk asterisk. He smiled, that warm smile that had comforted millions of children. Regret? That was the day I finally understood what I was supposed to be doing. Not just reading books, but creating space for people to be human. That widow taught me more in 5 minutes than I'd learned in 30 years of television. The producer pressed. But it broke every rule of children's programming. Exactly, LeVar replied. And that's why it mattered.